You'd wonder what all the fuss is about over closing off a few parking spaces in Castletown, but it's seen a couple of former town MHKs breaking cover on the subject. The latest of these is Richard Ronan, who led the regeneration work in Castletown during his time as MHK, and he joins me now in the studio.
Well, tongue-in-cheek, of course, but I was out last week and one of my good friends came up to me and said how very good it was of Castletown commissioners to recognise all the Liverpool fans in the Isle of Man by sticking a liver bird in the harbour. But no, saying that, it is a beautiful structure, the Heron, and whether it's the right place or whatever, but that's up to the commissioners to decide. But it is a very well-made structure, I must admit.
But it wasn't that prompted this interview. I mean, you had some concerns surrounding Castletown Commissioner's proposal to close off the square permanently to parked vehicles.
Yeah, look, I've got no objections to the commissioners making decisions of this nature and magnitude. As long as it's sort of based on economic and evidence, and they can justify that shutting the square all year round will benefit traders, the people. I think this is a good point to start talking about the original concept of the Regeneration Committee and why they were set up. They were set up before my time. It was in Tony Brown's administration. I believe it was one of Alan Bell's ideas, where we would invest money into the local economies and regenerate for the betterment of businesses, traders, to try and encourage new business to come into the areas. And that's what I was always led to believe it was. And that's how we worked at the Castletown Regeneration Committee when it was set up.
And we both, you and I, sat on our respective regeneration committees. I was in the one in Rushen, and you obviously did the one in Castletown. So you have certainly got an interest in what happens with relation to the square. But originally, there were plans for something a little bit greater than what ended up being delivered.
That's right. It was a finite amount of money. I don't say finite, it was an amount of money. I believe it was about £11 million across the island, and each area had to justify its projects to Council of Ministers for the relevant funding. We originally started out with a project in George Lane, which was the first. It was a trial project, which again is lovely, stands there to this day. And we also went onto the square and developed the square, but we also looked at projects in Castle Street, the back of Leonardo's, the front of Leonardo's and the Garrison down to the police station, and into Speaker's Garden as well, where we were going to form an entrance to the castle through Speaker's Garden via the square, which I thought was a lovely project. But as I say, there were hold-ups to the square proposal, which took about a year, and because of that, the money went to other places, which was a real shame. And I would encourage members and people within government now to revisit them plans, because they're really, really good, and going whether they can afford it now, but they should be kept in consideration, I believe.
And I suppose if we start off first principles about all of this, the whole idea of this was, first of all, to make the place, the whole of the island, particularly the urban areas, look better. But there was a kind of an economic advantage to doing this too, wasn't there?
Yeah, this was always in the back of my mind when we sat on our committees, was to understand the brief from Coleman. Yeah, to make the places look better, to tidy the areas up, but also to create economic growth and invest and encourage investment. And that's what we always wanted our project to be. And I believe the other projects were very similar minded as well, because I used to speak to the guys at the time when I was in there. And I'm concerned now with the regeneration schemes have kind of lost its purpose. I know it's 10 years ago. I know trading conditions have changed in them 10 years, but the concept is still there. And if Castletown especially are wanting to propose this all year round closure, like today, we're looking out of my kitchen window here and it's absolutely pouring down with rain. There's not going to be nobody in there, and I think if they are going to do this, then it has to be economically justified to the original concept of why they were done, and also, more importantly, to the taxpayers' money and the ratepayers' money who did contribute greatly to Castletown's regeneration scheme.
So I'm guessing then you think that perhaps there's the Commissioner's case is a bit light on economic justification. Well,
I haven't seen it, and the way they conduct themselves these days, they're via Facebook, social media, which is the modern way, but it's also very difficult to understand. I know they post things up, but I really think now is the time for central government to step in. It's their money in the mainstay here, and I'd like to see a study carried out to see if these regeneration schemes have been successful, not just Castletown, right across the island, and that any major changes to these schemes proposed, especially by the local authorities, be economically justified.
In a way, that's quite surprising to acknowledge that the schemes, the money was spent on schemes in Peel, Port Erin, Port St Mary, Castletown, Douglas, Ramsey, Laxey, and subsequently, that as far as I'm aware anyway, I haven't seen any assessments that have been undertaken, any measuring of success that's been done to see specifically whether the schemes have worked. Although I do know that the local economy strategy has recently been launched, and that looks at the local economy, but I don't think it specifically refers to the regen schemes.
Well, maybe it should. This is exactly what's happened. The £11 million, or what it was, has been spent. And I may say the projects across the island have definitely improved the visual appearance of all these areas involved. But there hasn't been any sort of barometers to say, yeah, this has worked, this hasn't worked, how can we learn from this? And that's all I'm saying now. And what I will say, if any study came back to say, yeah, this is a great proposal from Castletown Commissioners and we approve it, then I'd have no objections to this. I had no objections to them closing the square in the summer months. I must admit I had my initial doubts about it. But, as the Isle of Man sits where it does in the middle of the RSC, when the sun shines and the tide is in, it's absolutely the most glorious place on earth. But when it doesn't, it has its challenges. And that's the only thing. When the square was designed by the Regeneration Committee in Castletown, with everybody's buying, traders, businesses, everybody, it was meant to be flexible because of Castletown's historical nature of how it does things. Large events, the festival, Southern 100, TT events, and you name it, where we can shut the square at ease. And it was also proposed that we could shut the square to half the square, and it was meant at the time for summer months, so people could sit out and enjoy. And it was the heritage bodies at the time, Maxwell Heritage, said, we need a public realm space. And it was because Castletown had never had one in front of the castle, and we made an all year round small public realm space. Now this worked successfully for over 8 years, and now it's gone. It's gone to this more leisure facility. Great, and again, I have no objections to that, but I've never seen the evidence of why. And that's all I'm saying. As a former chairman of Castletown Commission, as a former MHK for the area, I still care passionately about the place. And, I'm just a little bit concerned at the minute that the decision making isn't based on the areas where it should be, which is evidence on the economy, local traders, local businesses, how they feel, because they're the people that matter along with the residents. So that's just it, really. And I call it back of a fag packet decision making. And if they can say no, Richard, this is the areas why, then fine. And I mean that, but I just want to see it. And I believe I heard my predecessor on the radio the other day, Tony, and he was speaking sort of similar language to me. And, let's see some evidence.
You were Minister for Environment, Food and Agriculture, so you were very actively involved in developing food strategies for the island. But you must be aware, whether you follow politics closely or not, of the the extreme pressure there seems to be at the moment on the hospitality sector and on the food sector, and actually the kinds of businesses that perhaps the regen schemes had been designed to try and attract, to try and encourage, maybe those businesses just don't exist anymore.
Yeah, as I said earlier, trading conditions have changed in the last 10 years. Not just to the Isle of Man, it's everywhere. The growth of the larger supermarkets, and we've seen that in abundance in the Isle of Man with the Tesco takeover, which is putting strains on the local suppliers and growers. That is a concern to me, and I hope going forward that they can find opportunities within the Tesco model, because we met Tesco's years ago trying to get the Manx produce into the markets, and they were always had an open door, but the standards to be met. And years gone by, you're either supplied to the butcher, you're supplied to ShopRite, who are very accommodating and said, "Oh, give it to us and we'll sort it out." That doesn't work with the big supermarkets. You have to have the standards to go in, and maybe the industry needs to, at this time, to say, right, okay, we need to adjust to suit, because they're not going to adjust. That's for sure.
And with regards to the regen schemes, what we were all presented with, when I say I'm talking about Council of Ministers, the ministers and the politicians who were sitting on the various regeneration groups around the island. There was a really strong case to suggest that the sort of regeneration work that we do, or we were proposing to do at least, when it was done in other parts of the British Isles, it had resulted in that kind of economic generation. So it's not like this was a kind of a back of a fag packet exercise. There was some real strong evidence available that regeneration schemes around the world did tend to be successful.
Certainly at the time, that was always the driver, because we looked at other areas and they had worked. The demographic at the Isle of Man is different. Castletown is a small population, is a small area, and this is why I'm very open and flexible to any proposals the commissioners are making. But as I say, Phil, it's just a question now to say, I was very proud of the regeneration scheme, the work and the people involved, and how it moved on. And I think there's a lot of people with may I say short memories of the hard fight how to get this project off the ground and eventually completed. And it is, to me now, it is time to say, right, just have a little pause right now and have a little think about is this proposal going to work? And to do that, it has to come through central government, Treasury, Comin, DOI. I don't think it would take long. Trading conditions, for sure, they're different. We know that. It is going to a more leisure-based central sort of areas where people can enjoy themselves, and I support the commissioners with that. But let's see the evidence. That's all I want to see.
With regard to the way in which government is approaching things, again, I don't know how closely you're following Manx politics these days, but do you see the same level of engagement that perhaps was required for the regen schemes? Because all the regen schemes were made up of a substantial amount of local interest, weren't they? It wasn't just the MHKs or the senior officers making these sorts of decisions. Yeah,
you're right. And I think engagement in politics, even back to my day, I started in central government in 2011. There was a lot of engagement through newspapers, radio, local communities, in the bars and the cafes. I've got to be honest with you, I don't feel it anymore. I do follow politics. Once it's in you, it's in you. I see a different type of politician now. I see a social media, data-based politicians who sort of copy and paste and take credit for things they're not really involved in. You can see it in America and the politics and the way it works now. It's all over the world, which is a real shame. The thing is, which I've noticed, certainly since the time I left office, is how quiet it is, how quiet the central politicians are, how quiet the local authorities are. I'm not saying everything was right in my day, because it wasn't. But the information was out there, the scrutiny was out there, and I think maybe the public has, the apathy set in. I don't know what it is, but we can't continue like this. The politicians are our decision makers or our lawmakers, and they should be open to scrutiny and challenge, encouragement, not just through social media. It has changed. However, it would be nice to hear more, from certainly both sides of the politicians, local and national.
Interestingly, at the Isle of Man Government Conference, we heard a number of speakers talking about social media. I think it's widely recognised that social media is a great tool in as much as it allows you to communicate with a lot more people much more instantaneously than perhaps you could in the past. But it also has a very dark and negative side, and that is the abuse that tends to follow any statement made by any person in power. Certainly, I mean, as a presenter, I get abuse on social media. I'm kind of used to it, having been in politics, but I heard from some sources that some of the politicians who very rarely appear on my programmes, the reason they rarely appear on my programmes is they are concerned not so much about appearing on the programme, but the social media abuse that will follow whatever it is that they say.
Yeah, I think what the digital age has done, I can remember when it arrived, the excitement, how everyone's lives were going to be easier, going to be simpler. That's not proven to be the case. What's happened, in my humble opinion, since the digital age, which is a good thing, I'm denying that, certainly in medicines and places like that, it's just made everybody too busy. Everybody's busy doing stuff they don't need to be doing. I've got it in my own household. We're looking at stuff we don't need to be looking at. We're not focusing on things we should be focusing on. And I think that's probably it in a nutshell. We're diluting ourselves too thin. I think everybody's tired in a different kind of way with it. And let's focus on what we should be focusing on. I'll give you an example. When I joined the Board of Commissioners back in 2005, every Monday night, at a public meeting, there would be members of the local press there would be members of the local media, Manx Radio, and at the end of the meeting, we were getting interviewed. There was in the newspaper, in a southern section, northern section, whatever it may be, and it was also on the 8 o'clock news. And you would go to work, I'd go to work, and people would be stopping you in your jobs in the street saying, I heard you on the radio today, that's a load of rubbish, that's brilliant, or whatever. I don't see that now. And whether that's, we're not going to fix the social media problem here in my kitchen, Phil, that's for sure. But clearly, it's not the gem in as it says it's going to be. I'd just say go back to the early 90s when the digital age arrived, how easy everyone's lives were going to be. Remember it? That's what everybody said. Is everybody's life easier now? I think everyone's life's more complicated. Just look at every government around the world. Look at the health services around the world. We had a long time to sort the digital age out. It's not easier. It's more complex. And that worries me. I understand the politicians being frightened of it, but they shouldn't be. They should control their social media activity. There's ways of stopping it, blocking it. People need, we as elected local representatives, we need to hear you. We need to hear, we've elected you for 4 or 5 years to make decisions on our behalf, and I'm not seeing that.
I was actually out at a meeting to try and find solutions for a long-term future for a hall in the Commissioners area that I'm clerk to. One of the Methodist ministers quoted from someone, and he couldn't remember who he was quoting from, but he was talking about social media and basically said, we are now in perhaps the most connected age that we have ever been in, but also the loneliest. Back in the 50s, just after the Second World War, the hall had been built by public subscription. It wasn't built by government, it wasn't built by the local authority. The people in the area all got together and said, we need a hall. We don't do that anymore, do we?
No, we don't. That's a really good point. That's again, but you get wisdom, don't you, from the clergy? You know, I love that, and that's why I was always kind of supportive of the Legislative Council, you know, hearing words. You know, when the Bishop got up to speak, you sat down and you listened. It was always refreshing to me, whether you're religious or not. In regards to the public being less engaged in the community, I think you've hit the nail on the head, whether it's the public hall in the area where you're from. Back in the day, Castletown Football Club, you know, it was which is still standing today, was built with public effort, people coming forward, donating whatever they could donate to build the stadium, which was the finest facility on the Isle of Man, probably still is actually. You know, that was built from people scraping pennies together. You know, we back in the late 90s, we set up a Castletown lottery to help fund the new Castletown. You know, an example of this is when I got elected to Tynwald, one of the first jobs, I remember I got put on the Manx Lottery Trust, and what an eye opener that was for me. And where I didn't know where the money was going. I didn't know where it was all getting distributed. And there's one example of a local organisation, football club I knew, and I knew the lads that played for that football club, and they built their clubhouse with their own hands. They fundraised and they built the facility. Fast forward 20 years, they're coming cap in hand to do work at the in their facility, and how their attitude had changed because the money was available. They stopped fundraising, they stopped building with their own hands, and they wanted government money or lottery money to build it for them. You know, that's a really good point, in fairness.
And do you think this is another part, I mean, it's not the social media part, but another part of the problem of the age in which we live in, that we have now become so accustomed to government doing everything for us that we've kind of lost the art of doing it for ourselves?
Yeah, that's exactly it. You know, the health service, everything. It's, you know, I found in my time, as a short period in politics, you give somebody something, they accept it and they're grateful for it, but you try and take it away, even if it's the smallest of items. The uproar, you can see it in the UK now. You know, and whether it should have been given in the first place is the answer. You know, people are different these days, and you know, it would be nice to have some form of reality again, some form of people doing more for themselves again. But that's probably a long way off.
Is this, though, just an age thing, that we are, you and I, similar age, getting older and starting to look back and think things were much better in my day? Rose-tinted glasses,
yeah. I don't know. I hope we're wrong. But, you know, you can see society around us. It's not a society that engages itself. It's not a society that goes out and congregates and meets like it used to meet. Again, the digital world is breaking down the local fabric of communities because people choose not to do it because it's easier to sit at home and do whatever they do. There's an awful lot of good in what goes on in social media. I see it in my own household. There's a lot of good. I think it's probably about getting the balance right. But you know, this is all over the world, everywhere. You know, everywhere you see people, they've got their hands up and their head in their phones, or they're not a phone, they're a computer, aren't they? You know, and it's it's a challenge for every community. But one thing for sure is that the Isle of Man has every opportunity, because we're so small, we've got our own government, to address these issues, to sensitively approach them. You know, instead of just following like little sheep. Let's have a look at how best our community works. Now, it doesn't matter about Manxness. You know, as well, we must encourage, we keep our Manxness. But it's about people. It's about people's lives, it's about standards of life. You know, making people's lives better. And, you know, there's a lot of mental health issues going on right now, and whether you link all that in. But, you know, we have opportunities here. We've got some great people over here, some great organisations over here. And maybe it is time, I don't know, to get together more.
I'll finish with a quote from your late father. I was talking to him about, actually it was the Mariners Choir, and we were talking about various chapels closing, and of course it's relevant to this conversation because it was the Methodist Hall that is at risk of being closed that we were talking about earlier. And your dad said, you can kind of understand the chapels going, but what gets me is the pubs.
I know. Well, everybody, if it costs £4 for a pint in the pub and £1 for a pint in Tesco's, I know what people are going to do. Going to pubs and going whatever, it was years gone by, was the spare change in your pocket, was the change left out of your wage packet. You look at people now, look at all of us, we're all doing it. We're subscribing to whatever, Netflix, mobile phones, contracts here, there. By the time you look at it, that's your disposable income. If your disposable income is gone, if it's a choice between £1 and £4, I know what people do.
That was former MHK for Castletown, Richard Ronan. So what do you think? Is the parking prohibition really the cause of Castletown's demise? Or perhaps you like what Castletown Commissioners are doing by prioritising people over cars? Let me know what you think by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gorn. Goramayo. Thanks for listening.